First of all, you do not need an MFA to write a book. I think you know that. I hope everyone knows that. I feel like that's a debate that kicks up on Twitter every so often, and I'm always like, yeah, no, that's silly. You don't need an MFA to write a book, to write a good book. I would say what set me up for success was I had a pretty strong vision that I wanted to finish a novel while I was there. That often the MFA program is geared towards short stories, which are great, and I love short stories, but I knew what I'm going to do with these 2 years is I'm going to write a novel. And I had Joe's voice, and I had some inkling of where I thought I was going, and so I was like, this is my time.
That's today's guest, Halley Sutton. She wrote the first draft of her debut novel, The Lady Upstairs, while she was getting her MFA at Otis College of Art and Design. So we got into the pros and cons of MFAs for writers. And we also talked book number 2, since Halley's currently in the home stretch with her second novel.
The second book is such a different beast, right? The first book, it's me and the book alone in the world, and we're really in protracted love affair, and you have all these hopes and dreams about stuff. And now I'm writing, and I spent 4 years on that book tinkering with it. And now I'm writing a book in 8.5 months to a year. With the first book, it was a little bit this is my baby. How dare you tell me it needs to change? And this book, I'm please tell me what's not working, because I don't know. I'm in it. I'm too close.
Halley shares how pitch wars helped her first book find its footing, how she turned a rejection letter into an agent, and more in today's episode. There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. Welcome to The Bleeders, a podcast and support group about book writing and publishing. I'm writer and podcaster Courtney Kosak, and each week I'll bring you new conversations with authors, agents, and publishers about how to write and sell books.
Hi, my name is Halley Sutton, and I am a feminist noir thriller writer.
So what drew me to today's guest was the premise of her first book, The Lady Upstairs. It was mentioned in an LA Review of Books article entitled, Damsels Get Even, Noir's New Feminists. I am a sucker for feminist bait, and I will take it any day of the week. I am so excited to chat with you.
I'm so excited to chat with you.
Okay, so we're going to get into the book and your other writing. I saw you have a fun Audible project going on.
Yeah.
But first, let's do the lightning round of questions. I kick off every interview with these same 5 questions. It's a speed round to introduce you to the author before diving deeper into their work. So when did you first identify as a writer?
So I wish I had a really cool answer for this, but the truth is I first identified as a writer. My first foray into writing really was almost fan fiction. I was a kid and I saw the movie Casper with Christina Ricci and Devon Sawa.
I was obsessed with that movie.
It was so good. And I was so bummed that he died before they could really make out at the end.
Totally.
That I rewrote the ending of the movie and gave the little booklet to all my parents and stuff. And they're like, what a weird, horny little kid we have on our hands. And then it was off to the races.
Oh my God, that's a tough answer to beat for future guests. That is so funny.
I like to set the bar in a weird place.
What's your all-time favorite book?
I would probably have to say Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. There's just such joy in the language, and he uses verbs spectacularly, which is such a weird, nerdy thing. But I just remember there's a sentence in the book describing somebody that says he storked his arms and turkeyed his legs. And it's such an evocative book for me that it's a one that I go back to when I need to feel excited about writing again.
I have never read it. What's the premise of the book?
The premise is Bradbury kind of, in the same way that Stephen King kind of traffics in that like small town nostalgia, he's always kind of writing the same thing. And so it's this small town and these two boys who are best friends, and a circus comes to town, only the circus is evil. And so it starts messing with all of the adults. And so it's an adult book, but has a lot of kid-like themes, kid-friendly themes. And so like the merry-go-round takes you back in time and like makes one of the mothers a baby. Like it's like this really weird, beautiful, spooky, Halloween-y book.
So have you always been into genre kind of stuff?
I would say so, yeah. I read kind of across the board right now. I'm reading a book called Vladimir by Julia May Jonas, and it's so good and it's definitely more literary. But yes, my heart always beats for like a good plot, good, juicy, weird plot.
Yes. Okay, what is your dream writing routine? If you had your druthers.
If I had my druthers, I wake up effortlessly, no alarm clock. I'm just like awake, ideally in like Italy or Spain. And I step onto a terrace and I just have like a coffee and I just go with the flow and write for like 5 hours, and you're just in the moment. Like that would be my dream, that I could immediately drop into like the good feeling of writing.
And then, okay, so juxtaposed against reality, what is your real writing routine?
My real writing routine, currently I'm on deadline for my second book to get my revisions back to my editor. So it is a lot of just writing whenever I can, before work, after work, whenever I get a free moment, just kind of always working on it. I usually do listen to music, but it's very unromantic. It's not like waiting for inspiration. It's not a beautiful thing. It's just grinding it out and making it better bit by bit.
God damn, a deadline really helps though.
It really does. It really does.
What's your day job, if I may ask?
Sure. I'm the managing editor for a collection of higher education newsletters published by a big publishing company called Wiley.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Cool. And what's one piece of writing that makes you jealous you didn't write it?
Oh, this was a good one. I struggled with this. I am really jealous of Kelly Link's book of short stories called Get in Trouble. It was a finalist for the Pulitzer, I think, a couple of years ago. Just the way her brain works is so, like, I feel like my brain works like A to B to C, and she's seeing 16 moves ahead, and you only realize it by the time you get to the end of a short story. And I'm just so jealous of whatever creative juice she has that's able to do that. It's really amazing.
I was instantly intrigued by the premise of The Lady Upstairs. So let's start with that and tell the listeners a little bit about the book.
Sure. The Lady Upstairs is a feminist noir thriller set in Los Angeles, and the main character, Jo, works at this blackmail agency with her best friend, Lou, who she kind of has this long simmering attraction to, and her sometimes on again, off again paramour, Robert Jackal, who's the photographer. But basically their job is they are handed names of men who have been hired by outside clients to kind of be taken down. And then they find and train girls to seduce and eventually blackmail them for power, money, all of the above. And then things start to go off the rails. It's already a morally gray, at least, setup, and then it starts to get progressively worse.
Yes, indeed it does. So it came out, in the last year?
2020, yeah, the tail end of 2020, November.
Okay, and then when did you first get the first nugget of the idea?
I would say probably around 2016. I just kind of had this really strong voice in my head of Jo, the main character, just like kind of immediately burst onto the scene. And for a long time, I was trying to figure out where to drop her, what kind of story to put her in. And as I've kind of mentioned, a few authors that I admire here who are speculative authors or magical realism or horror, that's not at all my genre, surprisingly, despite what I've said about these people. But I, for a long time, kind of thought that might be the fiction that I kind of wanted to write, and it just wasn't. And then I moved to Los Angeles in 2016 for grad school, and was like, oh, it's a noir. I'm writing a noir. And that's what her voice is. And kind of finding that piece of trying to understand Los Angeles through the angle of this like crime genre that is kind of so entrenched here in different levels kind of was the thing that helped me find a plot and the right place to put Jo.
Interesting. Okay, so on that note, let's back up for a second. When did you first start writing fiction?
Ooh, honestly, probably I was writing stories when I was like 7 or 8 years old.
So like fanfic forward, you're just...
Yeah, constantly.
Okay.
And then I got out of touch with it a little bit after college, as you do. You know, you get into the real world. And then I would say around 2014, I was just like, this is the thing I want to do. And so then I decided to go to grad school and pursue my MFA, which is like a whole different conversation. It's not necessary to be a writer by any means, but that was the avenue I took. And now here we are.
Well, I was going to ask you about the MFA experience and like what pieces of it do you think, I mean, okay, so I'll preface this by saying I originally was an actor, and in some ways going to school is like good, right? You learn the conventions and whatever, but also sometimes it kills the little
the joy.
The little love piece. So I guess like if you were going to do a Cliff's Notes of like pros and cons as a person who's already been through the MFA experience, what would you say really set you up for success? And was there any kind of drawbacks to that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, you do not need an MFA to write a book. Like, I think you know that. I hope everyone knows that. I feel like that's a debate that kicks up on Twitter every so often. And I'm always like, yeah, no, that's silly. You don't need an MFA to write a book, to write a good book. I would say what set me up for success was I had a pretty strong vision that I wanted to finish a novel while I was there. That often the MFA program is geared towards short stories, which are great. And I love short stories. But I knew like what I'm going to do with these 2 years is I'm going to write a novel. And I had Joe's voice and I had some inkling of where I thought I was going. And so I was like, this is my time. And I think having a very specific project to work on while I was there was really helpful. I also think the best thing, I mean, I learned a lot from my teachers in a variety of different ways, but the best thing that came out of it was absolutely the connections I made with other people. And that's a thing you don't have to be an MFA to find, you know, but you do need like a good group of writers, I think, to help you bounce ideas off. I think it makes your writing better. And it also makes it more fun, less lonely. Totally. And then the drawbacks, it's expensive. It is crazy expensive to get an MFA in this country. And it is not a degree that leads to any kind of certainty. A lot of people go into teaching with it or get a lot out of it, but it is not like a degree that is you're immediately going to go into a lucrative field. So I would warn people about that.
Well said. Okay, so writing process for the lady upstairs. You have the premise, you get to LA, you start grad school. When did the real like meat and potatoes, that first draft that sort of resembled what it is now, when did that come out? And how did you get there?
Oh God, it is a story. So my first year of grad school, I wrote about 150 pages over the summer, decided to scrap all but 10 of it, come back, rewrite 225 pages and have the first draft of what I think is going to be my novel by the time I graduate from Otis College of Art and Design here in LA. So I had this kind of draft of this thing that kind of had no plot and was kind of meandering and didn't really go anywhere, but had like a lot of vibes to it, like a lot of like noir vibiness. And my teachers liked it, and I felt like there was something really special there. So I was working it, and I started sending it out to agents. And I started getting some interest from agents, but a lot of rejections too. And a lot of the rejections that you get when you're querying are kind of one line, like, thank you so much, not for us, which totally understandable because they're getting hundreds of queries a day, but that isn't feedback that I can do anything with, you know? So after about 6 months of querying, I got a really, really nice rejection letter from an agent, Sharon Pelletier, and she sent me like 8 paragraphs of feedback. Here's what I like about the book. Here's what's not working. Here's what I think you should revise. But it's always up to you. If you revise in a way that like you think is kind of something I might want to see again, I would see it again. And it was like a lifeline in the dark. It was this beautiful, like, oh my God, somebody took the time and really broke down like what I'm missing. And it was so helpful. I think I probably sent her back like an inappropriately gushing email of like, thank you so much. This means the world. And she's like, easy, you know? Right. So I know I have to revise the book. I know I have to make huge, substantial changes to it. And I have no idea how. So around this time, I heard about something online called Pitch Wars. And unfortunately, it just ended this last year. But I know. And so Pitch Wars, for anyone not familiar, was this online mentorship program where published authors or agents or editors might volunteer their time and take on a mentee and work with them over the course of like 3 to 4 months to significantly change your book. So basically it has to be that you have you are kind of in the spot where I'm in. You've got this draft of a book and you know it needs to change, but you don't know how, and they're going to help you get it over the finish line. And at the end of that, there's this like agent showcase where it kind of fast tracks the querying process for you a little bit, where you get a bunch of attention at once and can be really helpful. And every year they had like 4,000 people apply to be in like 100 spots. And so I'm just kind of a newbie. I throw my hat into the ring and I'm like, here we go. I guess let me try this. And I ended up getting picked. It was like one of the luckiest moments of my life by a woman named Lane Fargo, who's now a really good friend of mine. She's written several books, including Temper and a book called They Never Learn, which has been lighting up social media for the last couple of years, about a woman who's a serial killer on a college campus picking off bad men. And it's like, so good.
Yeah, you guys are kindred, huh?
Yes, we are. So she picked me as her mentee. And so we spend 3 months just like overhauling. In that 3 months, I probably rewrote 40 to 45,000 words of my 85,000 word book. Like really like nothing like it. And some of her big notes to me were, your midpoint is in the wrong place and your pacing is off. And I was like, that is so helpful. What is a midpoint and where should it go? Presumably the middle. And so we worked on a bunch of different stuff, really kind of overhauled and changed the plot. And at the end of the Pitch Wars, I ended up signing with Sharon Pelletier, the same agent who had given me all of that really nice feedback. So it's like this kind of full circle dating story almost. And then with Sharon, I revised the book for like 3 to 4 months pretty intensively. And then we took it out on sub and we sold it to Putnam, to my editor at Putnam, Danielle Dietrich, in about 2 weeks, which was really amazing. And then she and I spent the next like 6 months revising it. So if you had told me when I first started writing the book how much revision was going to go into it, I think it's better I didn't know, because I would have been like, that's crazy. There's no way. And then there it was.
You don't have to do any spoilers, but like what kinds of things, having read the book, would I recognize as like things that got tweaked?
Oh, man. So much of it. With Lane, I mean, literally the whole story that is in the book now comes about because of Lane. Before that, it was this kind of meandering and...
Like the specific cases weren't those cases?
The specific cases were a little bit the same, but it kind of didn't build. It was just it was almost, I think what I was kind of doing on some level was I was taking noir scenes from movies and books that I really loved and translating them in my own way and like kind of making these pastiches across the book. And Lane was like, that's nice, but we need a plot here. And so it was like, well, what happens at the midpoint? Someone winds up murdered in the book now that you read, which was the same, except that happened at probably 25% into the book. And then it just kind of like drifted around LA for a while. So she's like, well, what are the consequences of that? Where do we have to go with that? What's going to actually happen next? Building in kind of some subplots about things. Building in, I would say, also different stakes to things. When the book starts, Jo is in debt to her boss, the lady upstairs, who isn't somebody that she actually knows. It's just kind of this like faceless woman or man who hands down the orders. And so kind of adding different urgency and stakes to it. That was the thing that I worked on both a lot with Lane and Danielle, trying to find a way to make the book feel immediately like you're in it and we're off.
And then on the 6 months that you worked with Danielle, what were your big priorities in that pass?
You know, that pass, I think, was partially about making it more marketable. I think the book still has the teeth that I wanted it to have, but I would say it was even spikier when Danielle bought the book. And it was a little bit making it more palatable to a readership, which is like a hard thing as a writer, right? Like you kind of don't want to do that, but I also understand that I am in commercial publishing and that, you know, somebody is making a financial investment in me and trying to get a return on it. And Danielle is great and she has a great vision. And we really there were a couple of things that we really kind of, definitely wasn't an argument, but like that I pushed back on and was like, no, this needs to be here and here's why. And then we would talk about ways to kind of fine tune that so that we could meet both of our visions. So that was interesting.
Okay. So then you just do a copy editing pass and you were done. When did you actually get to the finish line after you finished with Danielle?
Yeah, so we did a copy editing pass, and okay, so I work in publishing for my day job, so I know just how terrible authors can be, and I was such a terrible author during the copy editing phase, where I was like, Danielle was basically like, copy editing is supposed to be that you respond to queries that the copy editor brings up and you approve things, and I was like, we're gonna need to tinker with the like wording here and here, and I think I added like an entire 2 paragraphs at the end, and she was like, is this it? Are we done? Can we be done? And I was finally like, okay. So after the copy editing pass, which happens fairly late in the process, was kind of eventually when I was hands off with the book. And then at that point, I was so sick of it, I just didn't look at it for like a year.
And then it came out, I guess, during COVID. So did you get to have like a standard book tour experience or not really?
No, So the book was originally supposed to come out in July of 2020, but it got booted back to November because of COVID, because everyone was trying to figure out how is this going to impact books? How is this going to impact authors? And I do feel really lucky. I think that there were a lot of people who released in the early parts of the COVID pandemic that had a more difficult experience. By November, we kind of understood a little bit more what was happening. And so I did get to do a lot of events virtually. I have yet to do my first in-person event. So here's hoping for book 2.
Totally.
But there are pluses and minuses, right? Like, it is not at all how I pictured my first book coming out. You don't picture the like world collapsing right before like all of your dreams come true. But on the other hand, I got to go do events with bookstores across the country. Putnam was not going to send me on like a nationwide book tour. So I got to do events with people in Arizona and Texas and DC, and like all of that was like extremely cool. So that was really nice. And in a weird way, I think my response to the pandemic was, I was like, of course it matters to me how my book does and how people receive it. But at the same time, like, what's going on around us is so much bigger that some of that anxiety, I think, was a little turned off, because I was like, I don't know what the world is going to be like in a year. So I guess I can't worry too much about my book right now, which I think was probably for the best.
Yeah, good perspective for sure. I guess I didn't even check because I read the book, but who did your Audible recording? Did you do that or did someone else?
No, a very talented woman named Bonnie Turpin did the Audible recording. They did not offer me that option to read my own book, and that's fine. I don't know that I would have been great at it, but she did a fantastic job, so I was thrilled.
Nice. You're a good talker, so I don't know. Maybe throw your hat in the ring next time. So, what I was thinking when I read the book is, it's good IP too. So was that part of the conversation with Putnam, and are there any plans? So there are things that I can't talk about. I do have a film and TV agent separate from Putnam. The book, before it even came out, was optioned by Sony, which I think I can say at this point. And they had it for 2 years, and then the option ran out, and they decided not to re-up. Things may be happening now that I can't announce separately, but hey, that sounds good.
Yes, it is. It is exciting to see the possibilities of where it might be going, and I hope to sometime have an exciting announcement to share. Okay,
well, great. We'll put the good vibes out there. And I guess similarly, you are writing a scripted podcast, or you did write a scripted podcast for Audible, and it looked like Lane was involved in that project as well.
Yeah, so actually that was a weird pandemic baby that came about. I got together with Lane and my friend Megan Collins, who is her latest book, The Winter Sisters, her first book. Her latest book is The Family Plot, and it was Barnes & Noble's mystery thriller pick of last month. Like, that book has been everywhere, nice. Which is so exciting. And we decided to try our hand at something new. So we ended up getting lucky enough to sell a scripted fiction podcast to Audible. We're currently working on it, but basically the premise is a pop star who's had a very public meltdown 10 years before the start of the podcast returns to kind of the scene of, we're calling it Beat Fest. It's like a Coachella riff for sure. And then goes missing the night before her big set, her big like return to the stage, her big return to fame. And it's told through different viewpoints of people around her, including like her childhood best friend turned personal assistant, her biggest rival, and her biggest fan who like has a podcast interpreting her lyrics. This is how we should understand her. We're having a lot of fun with it.
Nice. And it's called Not That Innocent?
It is currently called Not That Innocent. We'll see if we get sued for using that title.
Right.
So it might wind up being something else by the time it comes out.
Fair enough. Okay. So now on to book 2. What can you share about where you're at in that process?
So I am currently finishing up the kind of first round of revisions, which ideally revisions are kind of like a funnel, right? Like the first round is the biggest, and then after that, you're kind of like fine tuning and massaging. So it's been a pretty heavy lift. I think it's going to be out spring or summer of 2023. It's called The Hurricane Blonde, and it is another feminist noir set in Los Angeles. It's not a sequel to The Lady Upstairs, but it does have some similar themes, and a few characters show up in different places, like minor characters. But it's the premise of that one is it's a woman who is a former child star who comes from like Hollywood royalty, like an Jack Nicholson, Angelica Houston type pairing, and has now kind of fallen into shame and ignominy and leads a true crime murder bus tour through Hollywood. And one day on one of her stops finds a dead body.
I love it. Amazing. What are your future goals after book number 2? Like, what's bucket list?
Bucket list? I am just, I'm so excited to try new things. I have like an idea for a TV pilot. I want to try my hand at writing. I think that with scripted podcast content too, like there's going to be all these kind of new different avenues for writing and creativity. And I'm just really excited to kind of try my hand at all of them. I will always want to write books. Books are like my love, my favorite thing. But I'm really excited to just try different things and see where it all goes, trying to lean into my like weirdest, most dreamy projects at this point after 2 years of being inside for a pandemic. I'm like, let's just try anything.
Totally. And on the day job tip, would it take a number, or like, is there something about that like helps keep you, on a regular schedule?
Yeah.
Or like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's like everybody's appetite is different. I am somebody who, if I'm making like insane Stephen King money, sure. But the idea of relying on my creativity, like writing my books as my sole source of income, the way that can go can be so feast or famine that's like an idea that at this point still really scares me. So it's really having a day job is both about having kind of consistency and having a routine, but it's also in some ways I still see it as freeing me up to be as creatively weird as I would like to be, because I'm not having to write specifically to an audience and going, I know this will sell. Another murder mystery about like I looked out the back window and my husband was murdering the babysitter. Like, I don't want to write. Those books are great. There's nothing wrong with those books, but I don't want to ever write to a thing that I feel is a trend necessarily. I want to write the books that I want to write. So a day job at this point is very necessary.
I totally get that. Is there anything else, I guess, about your book writing process or the publishing process before we get to parting words that you think people should know?
It can be really lonely. So I think building your community is really key to staying excited and staying fresh about stuff. And it's a good way to see what other people are working on and let them inspire you too, and back and forth. Because I guess that kind of ties into the second thing. I think if you're not having fun with it, then what's the point? Like that's the most important thing, is be doing it because you love it, and find the things that make it easier to keep loving it for a long time.
And now for the postscript segment. At the end of each interview, I like to ask authors for a few final pieces of advice that listeners can stick in their pockets for the road. What piece of writing advice do you wish you could give your former self?
Well, it's a piece I'm also still giving myself now currently, which is First drafts are bad. They're always going to be bad, and you just have to get through it. I really think that a big part of writing is like being able to endure the terrible first draft to just get to the point where you're making it better and it starts to feel like something you love. Because for so long, particularly with the second book, it just was like, felt so bad, and all you can do is just sit there and tinker with it and make it better. But like you have to keep working on it, otherwise you can fix anything but the blank page. And so I have to keep reminding myself of that over and over and over.
I know, but it is so humbling to look at those first drafts and be like, fuck.
Yeah, totally.
I was going to ask you this. Do you feel like on the second book you've been able to embrace the editing process more after having gone through it and just like seeing how it worked for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And like the second book is such a different beast, right? Like the first book, it's me and the book alone in the world. And we're really like in this protracted love affair, and you have all these like hopes and dreams about stuff. And now I'm writing, and I spent 4 years on that book tinkering with it. And now I'm writing a book in 8.5 months to a year. I was always very grateful for Danielle's feedback and input. But with the first book, it was a little bit like, this is my baby. How dare you tell me it needs to change? And this book, I'm like, please tell me what's not working, because I don't know. I'm in it. I'm too close. Like, it has been so helpful. And Danielle is really the best. Like, we have had a couple of times where she'll just get on the phone with me and we'll talk for like 2 hours. Like, this isn't working. How do we tweak this? Like, we need a better red herring. Just it, like, getting into the nitty gritty of it with her has been unbelievably helpful, and just really like hope that I get to keep working with her for a really long time, because I really think we vibe well. But yeah, editing this book has been a totally different experience than the first book. Editing this book was like, please give me direction. Give me as much direction as you can.
Yeah. So wait, so you're working with Danielle for the second time now?
I am, yes.
Oh, that's amazing. That's like goals to build a relationship with an editor like that, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We sold my second book on proposal, which is a fun way to do it, because then you don't have to write the whole book. But then they pay you and you're like, I guess I have to write this whole book now? Like, okay.
That's hilarious. But congrats for selling it on proposal. What's one tip for writers trying to get a book published?
Yeah, I would say it's similar to the tip I said before about building your community, but like really that's true. And that's true in like a very feel-good way about the things it'll do for your creativity, but it's also true in terms of you don't know who might be able to like hook you up with an agent, and it might be that like particular nudge of saying like recommending it from somebody that like helps you go to the front of the pile, helps you get better eyes on your work. It could be the people you reach out to when you do publish your book, and they're the ones who will read it and give you a blurb for your back cover. Just building your network. So much of publishing feels out of your hands when you're querying or when you're on submission, and it can be like such a beat down to just sit there watching your inbox all day. But like something you can concretely do is reach out to people on Twitter or Instagram, or find ways to make connections, especially if you can do that out of like genuine admiration and passion for what somebody is doing, and not in kind of like a usury sick. Yeah, exactly. But like if it's like, I really loved this book, well then send her a note on Twitter or an email or something, just like be really genuine about it. But I think that that's a really, it'll at least make you feel like you're doing something while you're in the big wait.
Yeah, that's such good advice anyway. Because, I just got a note about my other podcast the other day, and it feels so good when you get those messages. But then sometimes as a reader or a listener or whatever, you forget to send them. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I should do that.
Or you're like, they won't want to hear from me or whatever. But like everybody always wants to hear nice things, Like just don't be weird about it.
What's your all-time favorite piece of your own writing?
I would say The Lady Upstairs. It was just, the first book is like such a romance, because it's just you getting to do whatever you want to do. And I conveniently have forgotten in some ways that I spent 4 years working on that. So I read that and there'll be sentences where I'm like, wow, what a great sentence. Why can't I write that sentence again? And it's like, yeah, because you spent 4 years tinkering with it, like, so it gets to kind of stand, like, that's for sure my favorite thing.
I recommend getting a copy of The Lady Upstairs if you have a feminist noir itch to scratch, and let's be honest, who doesn't? You gotta love a messy, badass leading lady, and of course, connect with Halley online.
You can find me on Twitter at Halley_Sutton, or you can find me on Instagram at HalleySutton25. The Lady Upstairs is out. The Hurricane Blonde will be out spring or summer next year, along with the Audible probably at the end of 2023, maybe. There is an upcoming release, not by me, that I would love to promote. There's a book called More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez coming out June 7th, and it's such a beautiful, interesting meditation on true crime and a crime story I haven't seen before about a woman who's got two husbands, one in the United States, one in Mexico City, and they find out about each other, and one ends up dead. And it's so beautiful and so well written, and I'm so excited for that book to be out in the world, and everyone should go read it.
Amazing. Well, I love women taking over this crime space through this feminist lens. So that's amazing. And thank you so much. It was so good to get to know you a little bit and have this conversation.
Yeah, back at you. Thank you, Courtney. This was really wonderful. Thank you.
That is it for this edition of The Bleeders. If you missed the last episode, which just happened to be the very first episode ever of the podcast, make sure to go back and check it out. The guest was Samantha Allen. She's the author of Real Queer America and Patricia Wants to Cuddle. And she is just so forthcoming about her publishing journey and everything she's learned along the way. Here's a little preview of that conversation.
I didn't know where it would wind up when we started the process. I was not known for writing fiction. When I first started writing it, my email to my agent said, you're gonna think I'm losing my mind, but I'm writing a book where, a monster murders reality show contestants. Well, do you think we can do something with this?
Thanks for tuning into The Bleeders. Writing is so much better with friends. I'm your host, Courtney Kosak. Hey, let's connect on social media. I'm at Courtney Kosak, Kosak, on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you're signed up for the Bleeders Companion Substack. The link is in the episode description. And I hope you'll join me on Thursday for a brand new interview with one of my writing mentors, Chloe Caldwell, author of 4 books, including Women and The Red Zone. It is a truly awesome conversation. And in the meantime, happy bleeding.